All right, Nick, let's talk about the Miami Dolphins. I'd say disappointing into the season for the Dolphins. It's been, a bane of them. Injuries really holding this team back for a long time, but there's some news on the horizon for the Dolphins as far as player who's kind of turned sour on the team, potential for the Dolphins to make a move and get something out of it. I think this could be the start of making some strong moves for the Dolphins going forward. But before we get into that, I'm Andrew, and this is Saturday Morning Inspection. All right, Nick, as I alluded to, Dolphins, let's get straight into it. Talking about the potential of a trade of Tyreek Hill, the way that Tyreek Hill ended the season, not leaving a great taste in people's mouth, but it seems like the Dolphins are opening the door to potentially move Tyreek Hill to another team, and we've got some great sources on that as well. Let's get into the article and we can talk more about it on the other side. This, of course, is from Dolphins Wire. It says, a Miami Dolphins divorce with Tyreek Hill could be coming this offseason after the receiver quit on the team in week 18 and told reporters that he was opening the door to leave Miami. But would the Dolphins really consider trading Hill to a divisional rival? According to ESPN's Jeremy Fowler, one of the best reporters around the block, he's always a straight shooter and doesn't say stuff unless there is some merit behind it. Says at least one NFL executive thinks a deal that sends Hill to the New England Patriots makes sense. This is via Jeremy Fowler. The Patriots are desperate and they need a guy that alpha that can be friendly for Drake May. A veteran NFC personnel man said there's a chance of the draft picks that Miami would receive in a trade, obviously from the Patriots in this instance, would be higher than that they would get with a contender. So more compensation for the Dolphins there as well. This, of course, all again from Dolphins Wire. I think it's a really interesting scenario for the Dolphins to move off a Hill and try to get something from him in the process. Nick, I'm curious of what your thoughts are on this one. But before we get to you, Dolphins fans, in the comment section below, this is kind of a two-part scenario for you. A, do you think it's time to move off of Tyreek Hill? What do you think in that scenario? Keep him, move off of him, let us know your thoughts. And then secondly, let us know, what are you thinking this team should look to get from a guy like Tyreek Hill as well? Give us your thoughts on all of that in the comment section below. But nonetheless, Nick, what are your thoughts on the latest here about the Dolphins and Tyreek Hill?
Yeah, I think it's inevitable at this point that the Miami Dolphins are going to move on from Hill via a trade. And I think the Patriots connection is very interesting. And look, I know everyone's like, it's in the division. Who trades within the division? Teams trade within the division more often than you think, especially when it makes sense. The Miami Dolphins, currently, according to overthecap.com, they sit about $11 million over the salary cap, 11.9 million to be exact. That's not a great situation to be in. So they need to make some moves. They have a lot of flexibility. They can pull a lot of levers. Getting under that number isn't going to be hard, but it's the way they want to do it. And you deal with a guy like Tyreek Hill, who this is an opportunity for the Dolphins to sell high. Hill is still viewed as a Pro Bowl #1 alpha wide receiver, like you mentioned in that report, even though statistically his numbers are in a little bit of a decline. Now, look, I know the injuries at the quarterback position that definitely hurt that, but Tyreek Hill, if you look at his numbers, 2024, he only had 81 receptions. That's the fewest he had in a season where he started at least 16 games since 2018. We're going back 6 years. That's a long time. Tyreek Hill is now on the other side of 30. He's got some drama, got some baggage that's starting to show up. It hasn't completely unveiled itself yet. But the reality is now is the time, if you're going to move off of Tyreek Hill, to do it to get the most bang for your buck. And a team like the New England Patriots, they need players. And there's a lot of teams like this. You can throw maybe even the Titans in there. You can throw the Bears in there. You can throw the Raiders in there in a lot of ways where teams are just looking for players, looking for big names. They're looking for talent, and they've got the dollars to go out there and make that kind of move. The Miami Dolphins need a team that's willing to take on Tyreek Hill's contract, at least the end of it, because there's still some significant dollars allocated If the Dolphins want to get a complete reprieve of his contract, they obviously would get less in return. So they have to figure out how they want to go about this. Would they rather unload most of the contract, designate this as sort of like a post June 1st trade that would open up the most cap space for them? Or do they want to get the most draft capital in return, but take a bigger dead salary cap hit for the future? There's a couple different strategies the Dolphins have to consider, but I think they've got two good opportunities here to get this team trending in the right direction for the future. Tyreek Hill's a great player. We all know that, right? He's going to probably go to the Hall of Fame, but he is slowly starting to enter the decline. You've got Jalen Waddle, a guy who can be a legitimate one. You spent all this capital at running backs, wide receiver, and tight end over the past number of years in the draft. You've got an offensive lineman that's kind of in transition. Young guy, Patrick Paul. I really like him. We broke down a lot of his film over the course of the season. I think he's going to be one heck of a player. They've got a lot of young pieces. Now's the time this offseason to say, okay, we're going to reload. We're going to kind of go away with the old, go away with the veterans, get something in return, and hand this over to the young guys and get this ready for the next generation for this Miami Dolphins franchise. And I think now is the time to do it. Don't wait. A lot of mistakes teams make is say, well, maybe we can keep it on for one more year. The problem happens, one more year happens, Tyreek Hill gets hurt or his numbers continue to dip, and suddenly you can't get rid of him for anything. Nobody wants him anymore. Now is the time to make the trade. And that's why you're seeing executives, according to Jeremy Fowler, who's a great reporter, come out and say, listen, Tyreek Hill's going to get traded. And we're starting to hear rumors of this percolate more and more and more and more. And look, the Dolphins came out, Greer came out, I believe, and said, listen, we don't want to trade Tyreek Hill. But the reality is, if Hill wants to leave and the dollars make sense and the direction the team is going makes an indication that that's a good way to go, I think the Dolphins are going to do it at this point. There's too much momentum. There's too much dollars and cents of salary cap economics to not make this kind of move, especially if you can get some much needed draft capital. I think this is a Dolphins team that is sort of not as close as people think to being contending. Having Tyreek Hill on this team doesn't make this a 15-win team in 2025. But moving off Tyreek Hill, getting some capital could give them the assets they need to maybe make that leap in 2026. I think that's a strategy the Dolphins are going to use, and I think it's the smart move to make.
Yeah, Nick, and we talk about Tyreek Hill. We talk about selling high on Tyreek Hill. I think there's a great opportunity to do that here because, like you said, stats took a dip. This is the first time in 5 years for Tyreek Hill that he's been under 1,000 yards. Quite frankly, this is the first time in 5 years he's been under 1,200 yards. 959 yards for Tyreek Hill this season. But I think the key here is you brought it up. The injuries at the quarterback position, people probably largely correlate to a missing 6.5 games this year with the dip in stats. It's not the performance of Tyreek Hill that has been correlated to the dip in stats. So I think he's still valued extremely highly by other teams. So you have the best opportunity right now to where you can kind of feel the slide, get out from under it before you can't stop and it becomes an avalanche and you lose everything that you have invested in this. And I think another option here that you talked about is, okay, the main trade here that is on the table as of this point is to the Patriots. And you say, well, are rival trades like this something that has happened? Yes, the Dolphins have done it a couple of times as of recently. 3 years ago, Miami did the trade of Devontae Parker to the Patriots. Couple years or before that, Kalen Ballage was traded to the New York Jets. The trade didn't end up going through due to like a physical, but still they have gone with teams in this division to make trades a couple times in the last few years. I think this is a really good option for the Dolphins. I think that it's the right time to move off of Hill. I think he still has a lot of value and perceived value by other teams. I think that's the key here. I think his value is diminishing with the Dolphins, but his perceived value with other teams in the league is still there. It's the perfect time to move off of Tyreek Hill. And if the Dolphins do that, it shows to me that they're thinking of things in the right direction. I think it would be a really smart move for this team.
And if you're looking for a comp, look at what the DeAndre Hopkins situation with the Titans and what Tennessee did there. Tennessee waited too long. They acquired Hopkins, wasn't fitting with their team. They wanted to make a move, but at that point, Hopkins was 31-32, was coming off a season where he was below a career average in receptions, kind of like the trend Tyreek Hill is on now. He hasn't bottomed out yet, but Hopkins was on that similar trend. By the time the Titans wanted to move off Hopkins, they could only get a conditional 4th-round pick for him. Now is the time if you want to move off of Tyreek Hill to do it. That's why we're seeing these reports, and I think the Dolphins are going to make that move.